politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to be talking about what has been happening here in the state of Texas after the election. But let me just mention that later we're going to get into some of the news stories, and we have quite a number. First of all, of course, 12 dead as a result of a gunman in California coming into a California country bar. Kills himself after hurtling smoke grenades, actually killing a sheriff. We'll get into all of those details a little bit later. Yesterday, as we had Nick Pitts with us, we did talk about the fact that Jeff Sessions was forced out as Attorney General. What does that mean in terms of some of the investigation? And, of course, yesterday we talked about off-air, but really didn't talk about on-air, the decision by the White House to suspend the press credentials for CNN's Jim Acosta. And if that's not enough, Tucker Carlson had his home targeted last night. They were shouting, actually rushed the door, broke part of it when only it was his wife who was at home, and some of those kind of assaults that we've talked about before. Also, I've posted a couple of other articles related to some of the other topics, including the Republican gains in the Senate and what that might mean for these various judicial nominations. So we've got a lot of material on the website, other material we're going to cover, and of course, if we don't cover all of it today here on Thursday, you know we'll cover it tomorrow on our Friday weekend edition. Let me just mention, though, that we are privileged to have in studio somebody we've talked to a couple of times already, and that is Jonathan Saenz, and he is the president of Texas Values. If you're not familiar with him, we've mentioned his name many times before, even when he hasn't been in the studio, because he served in the past as the director of legislative affairs and was the attorney for Liberty Institute, which of course now is First Liberty, and an individual that has been very much involved in State Board of Education. We're going to give you some action items on that in just a minute, by the way. A graduate of the University of Texas at Austin and University of Houston Law Center. And also we want to talk about this Texas Gala. But first of all, welcome to Point of View.
Kirby, it's great to be back. Always a joy to spend time with you.
This is the first time you've seen the studio. What do you think?
It's fantastic. You know, and if I didn't know any better, a lot of the equipment around here looks very similar to the studio that you had a few years ago in a different building. So y'all did a great job of transplanting things. It seems seamless.
Yes, well, it's so funny because this table is almost older than some of the millennials we have around our millennial round table. But nevertheless, you've been around for a number of years, been a good friend. And before we get into some of the races, let's talk about, and then we'll come back and talk about it again, the Texas Faith and Family Freedom Gala. That is taking place a week from this Saturday on the 17th. Now, if you click on the picture of Jonathan on our website, pointofview.net, you will see that will take you to, again, txvalues.org. Upper right-hand corner is a place where you can register and attend. Michelle Bachman's going to be speaking. Isn't that going to be fun?
Well, we're so excited to let everyone know that on November 17th, Saturday, here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Texas Values is going to hold their Texas Faith, Family, and Freedom Gala. This organization that I lead, we've been doing this now for 4 years. This is the largest event that we have all year. It will definitely sell out. Our keynote speaker is going to be Michelle Bachman. Special guests include Kelly Shackelford and our very own Kerby Anderson of Point of View Radio that is going to be the MC for the event. We're going to have some notable elected officials there, some notable people from around the area that are so important to the faith, family, and freedom movement. So the biggest way that you can make an impact for these values in Texas is go to txvalues.org, get your tickets today, and come to the Faith, Family, and Freedom Gala.
And I might just mention they also have the Kelly Shackelford Award.
Right.
And that is really something that I think is a lot of fun. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, even though I'm on the inside, they didn't tell me either. So it'll be fun to find out.
It will be a
who's gonna
secret.
win.
Now, let me say one thing, too, for your listeners. We just announced this yesterday for 3 days, and it actually ends tomorrow. It started yesterday. There's a 50% flash sale. Okay, we're doing a discount for just the next 2 days. Ticket sales really shot up yesterday. So the ticket prices for individuals and couples, and there's a reduced price for our bronze table. 50% for the individual tickets, and for the couple tickets. That ends tomorrow, though. So, and this event will sell out. So do not wait. Go to txvalues.org right now.
Let me just say, because again, they really want you to know by November 9th, and I can look at my calendar and say that's tomorrow. So again,
that's right.
There are all sorts of actions, and I don't know about you, Jonathan, but our listeners, and I guess I'll just warn you that right now, when we do like fundraising, they all wait to the last day, sometimes the last hour of the last day, sometimes when we have year-end appeals or when we have, fiscal year-end or we do our truth team. So I'm just telling people, could you just get on the website right now? It's txvalues.org. You know you want to be there. You'll have a chance to meet, of course, Kelly Shackelford. If you've never met him before, you'll have a chance to meet Michelle Bachman, who is just a delightful individual. A little bit later, I'm going to play something that she said about point of view, so we'll get into that in just a minute. But that is the event, and so that is great. And again, that flash sale today and tomorrow, so don't wait any longer.
Well, and look, and I'm guilty of it sometimes, too.
Yeah.
I will go to events, and I've been on my way to events, and I'll stop for a second and like RSVP. So we understand that happens sometimes. We don't want you to wait till the last minute. But if you get in before tomorrow, you will get that 50% off sale. And that's one way for us to make it family friendly.
Right.
We recognize a lot of times to cover your costs and to have a little bit over that, because this is a way to get support for our work. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, but we don't want to make the ticket price so high that good folks that have families can't come. So this is your family friendly opportunity.
Yeah, again, Four Seasons in Las Colinas, and again, you move it around. Sometimes it's in Houston, San Antonio, whatever. It's in Dallas. So our Dallas listeners, let's get involved. Okay, well, let's look at these elections for a minute, and we'll come back to the gala in just a little bit. Good news, bad news. Let's talk about the bad news first. Look at two members of Congress that you and I talked about the other day.
Sure.
Pete Sessions in Dallas, John Culbertson in Houston, both lost to Democrats. The impact that has means two less Republicans from the Texas contingent going there. Also, of course, it has meant nationwide, I don't know whether we're going to end up with 34, 36, 38, whatever. You have a number of Democrats that have taken over Republican seats, which means, of course, Democrats control the House of Representatives. So what can we learn maybe from the situation in which we had two really qualified individuals lose as incumbents?
Sure. Well, if you go to our website, txvalues.org, we've put up a blog piece about this, and really the title was Cruz Wins, but Texas takes some big hits. And we did. I mean, if you care about the issues of faith and family like we do and like many of your listeners do, what you have to recognize that if you elect a Republican or a Democrat, there's going to be a difference in the type of policies that you get. And when it comes to the U.S. House, and I'll talk about the Texas House in a minute because some of the bigger hits were at that level and some of our judge positions and so on. But you look at the balance that's being tipped now, you're going to have Nancy Pelosi likely in power. We know some of the liberal policies that she believes in coming out of California, wanting money used to support abortion groups like Planned Parenthood, the whole issue with Obamacare, being against religious liberty on so many important issues. And so people need to brace themselves and be ready to do something. And look, the elections are gone. There's not an election tomorrow where you can say, oh, well, I missed my opportunity. Let me do something now. No, that opportunity's passed. You're going to have to wait probably a couple of years. There may be a few runoffs in different parts of the state, but they're few and far between at the local level. So now what you need to be thinking about is whether you voted or not, how can I make an impact on policy? And so that's at the federal and the state level, because I can guarantee you that you have more Democrats in there. They usually are pro-abortion. They're against us on religious liberty. They're going to try to push through and makes a difference on those issues that they care about. And that's going to be hard for faith and family issues.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about some of those replacements, whether it is Van Taylor or Dan Crenshaw or a couple of others in Congress. Then we'll talk about the Texas House and the Texas Senate. A lot to cover today with Jonathan Saenz. We'll continue that right after these messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Congress has lots of unfinished business. One important item is prison and sentencing reform. The House of Representatives has already passed the First Step Act. It is time for the Senate to do the same. Recently, I had Rebecca Hagelin on Point of View Radio Talk Show to talk about her commentary on our failing prisons and faulty war on drugs. A few months ago, I had Star Parker on to talk about the same legislation. These women will admit that they have been known as being tough on crime, but both of them also realize locking up parents of kids for years for nonviolent drug offenses is doing more damage to society than good. Our current federal laws require mandatory sentences for nonviolent drug offenses. Often the people we throw into prison for 2 decades are low-level dealers, not drug kingpins, who we really need to get off the streets. Sadly, they receive little or no vocational training and little in the way of drug rehabilitation. No wonder the recidivism rate in America is so high. President Trump has made this issue one of his most important issues. Jared Kushner has been given the responsibility to push the legislation forward. It passed the House of Representatives back in May with overwhelming bipartisan support, and when it reached the Senate Judiciary Committee, senators added some modest common sense sentencing reform initiatives. To those who say that this is merely an attempt to be weak on crime, Rebecca Hagelin has a response. A very small percentage of arrests for drug distribution involve major drug traffickers. Most of the arrests are for small-time, nonviolent offenders. Many of them are addicts who turn to selling drugs to support their habit. Warehousing them in prison for years at taxpayer expense makes little sense. That's why it's time for the Senate to vote on this sensible piece of legislation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. Indivisiblemovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Jonathan Saenz with us. By the way, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And, of course, I know most of you just want to sit back and listen, and that is certainly fine. Let me also mention that if you'd just like to leave a message, a lot of you also listen on Facebook Live, and there's a place where you can leave a comment, and I'll try to read those a little bit later. But we were looking at Congress for just a minute. We're going to come back to the Texas House and Senate. But when we look at this, I thought this was interesting because you've taken some individuals who are replacing others, and I was very encouraged by that. Van Taylor sat in that chair many times before, replacing Sam Johnson. Well, you can never replace Sam Johnson, but I understand in terms of youth and vigor and interest, that was good. Chip Roy replacing Lamar Smith, Ron Wright replacing Joe Barton. But a man that is probably known around the country right now, Dan Crenshaw, replacing Ted Poe, in large part because I didn't know, I'm familiar with the 1st Congressional District because we have Louis Gohmert on there. Sometimes he even sits in this chair. But I really was not even paying attention to the 2nd Congressional District until he got a mention on Saturday Night Live, right?
Yeah, look, and I mean, you don't mess with a Navy SEAL. I'm not from Texas, particularly.
No.
And, Congressman Crenshaw, as we'll call him now.
Yes.
He and I have met, spent some time with him in Houston, and he's a warrior. I'm going to tell you, he stands up for what he believes in. And so it was way over the line for people. And what happened was he wears a patch in his right eye. He served, I don't know how many tours in combat. He was a Navy SEAL, and he lost sight in his right eye. And I don't remember all the circumstances of why he wears a patch, but he cannot see out of that eye. That's what he's chosen to do. And so
he had to switch the way he shot because,
Yeah.
an IED blew up his, I think, translator. So he'd been shooting out of his right eye. Now he's learning how to shoot out of his left eye, which
it's remarkable.
And goes back with, with one
It's remarkable.
eye.
And so now he's choosing to continue his public service by serving in Congress. And so he did win. And that was a seat that opened up and was very active in the primary. So he spent a lot of time working on that race and generated a lot of support. And so it's unfortunate that you'll see people in Hollywood or the media, whoever, Saturday Night Live, try to make fun of people and mock people like that who, the guy put his life on the line. So it was uncalled for, but what ended up happening, it just drew more attention to him, and people supported him even more because of that.
And I thought his response was that. He says, I'm tired of everybody demanding an apology, and I don't need an apology, and, all the rest. And I thought that was really good. And
but
really
that's important for that seat to be held on to. And to your point, Chip Roy is in the Central Texas area.
There you go.
Chip Roy is a former chief of staff for Ted Cruz. A lot of people may not realize that. We used to office across the street from each other. And he is somebody that I personally supported. I lived close to that district. He worked very hard, and that is a key area of the state that, you've got some blue and red areas, and he was able to generate enough support and he's a very conservative in his ideals and principles. And I think that district is going to be served very well for Faith and Family because of Chip Roy.
Well, again, let's move from Congress to the state of Texas. And first of all, the Texas Senate. Now, we'd had Connie Burton on a couple of times, and she made it very clear that hers was really a contentious race because you had a Republican in that seat, then you had Wendy Davis, her, now a Democrat. So it switches back and forth. But we also, and I think this was, again, credit to Kelly Shackelford, started saying not only should we pay attention to Connie Burton, we should pay attention to Mr. Huffines, Don Huffines. And, of course, both of those individuals lost.
Yeah, and in Don Huffines' race, it wasn't all that close. I don't think he even got 46%. And a lot of that had to do with this, turnout and this strong wave, if you will, in Dallas County. But in something I want people to understand, too, and first of all, if you got involved, if you voted, whatever you did in that related to that, thank you, because those efforts are extremely important. We have a voters guide website that we run. We get a ton of traffic there. We try to help people be prepared to vote as well. And you just can't overstate the importance. So what I want people to understand, though, and appreciate, while voter turnout was up at 52%, that still means 48% of registered voters in Texas did not vote. As much attention as this election got, right?
Yeah.
Between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke, $100 million of money was raised, and still 48% of the people decided not to vote. And so, and look, you got to appreciate that if you care about faith and family issues, it's in like some of your large counties like Dallas County and even obviously Tarrant County as well, that you're going to see a turnout of voters that vote for Democrats or particularly don't support some of these faith and family issues, pro-life, religious liberty, and what have you. So if you're in one of these areas that's a little bit more rural or a little bit more red, if you will, the turnout numbers have to be higher if you want the candidate that you support to win. And so look, Connie Burton, very strong on faith and family issues. As a matter of fact, we've invited her to our gala. We're hoping that she's going to attend because she's distinguished herself very well on these type of issues. So is Don Huffines. So there is something that the state of Texas is going to lose when it comes to faith and family issues because the two of them are not coming back to Texas Senate for this legislative session.
And I just was thinking about that because the lieutenant governor, who basically runs the Senate, has two fewer conservatives that he could depend on, and that's significant. And just for a minute, since we're talking about Dallas County, here's a good example of something that is going to change, and that is straight party voting. Because you have straight party voting, and I used to live in Dallas County, it used to be easier to be a Republican in Dallas County than it is now. And it's hard to be a Republican in Dallas County, easier to be a Democrat. Just the reverse in Collin County, where I live now, where I think almost all those individuals that were Republicans won. I think they all deserve to, but this straight party voting means that they don't even take the time to figure out who the county clerk is, or maybe the judge or the justice of the peace. That is something that's going to go away and maybe will be more helpful because right now it's when people come in and vote straight party, they don't even take the time to research all the individuals that might be down on the ballot.
No, it's going to be real interesting to see the impact that has. When you look at Collin County, someone like Matt Shaheen, who just barely won re-election, if you will, 50.5. Angela Paxton, who, while she did win, but it was only by 2 or 3 percentage points. And so whatever you make of it, I mean, Collin County is considered a conservative county, a very strong Republican county, and the margin for victories for a lot of those Republican candidates was a lot shorter or smaller than you would have expected. But I think it's also notable for people to understand Greg Abbott, who has been one of the most pro-life, pro-religious liberty, pro-privacy, if you want to get into the issue of not allowing men into women's bathrooms. Greg Abbott was the one that put the Privacy Act on the special session last year. He got close to 56%. So a lot of people are trying to make an issue of some of these candidates and say, oh, they lost because they took a position on this issue or that issue. I don't think that's the case. I mean, Greg Abbott could not have been a stronger champion for some of these issues, and he was up there at 56%. Now, I would have expected, I think a lot of people expected he might have gotten a little bit higher, but some of that certainly was the impact of the $70 million that Beto O'Rourke's campaign raised that impact down the, and this is my point in some ways. That side, well, think of it what you want. If you're not on that side, depending on where listeners are, they put their money where their mouth is. And people have to be prepared to do that. And when the rubber met the road, they got out there and voted. That is the difference. And that oftentimes is the biggest difference when it comes to elections. And so you got to want it more. And to some extent, some of those folks wanted it more than others.
Well, and again, I think there's a lesson to be learned there, and that is, well, actually two lessons. Lesson number one, even if you raise $70 million, and we spent about $5 billion on the campaigns all across the country, and I looked at the top 7 donors, 5 of whom are names you've heard of, people like George Soros and Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg and all the rest. Getting more money doesn't necessarily mean you win, but on the other hand, getting the grassroots out and having some enthusiasm, there were a lot more Beto signs out there than there were Cruz signs, does make a difference.
And, you know, it's an interesting point, too, Kerby, because I walked some neighborhoods around the area where I live in the northwest part of Austin, and there were a lot of people, and people I talked to as well, that didn't support Beto O'Rourke, but they were uncomfortable about putting up a Cruz sign, even though they support it. And I get that, right? Yeah. You know, you maybe a bunch of your neighbors, but why? Okay, if they're putting their sign up, why would you not put your sign up? And you have to be aware that it, to some extent, sends a message. It's not everything, but you got to, at some point, decide you're going to stand up for what you believe in one way or another, or the other side is going to speak for you. I mean, you hear it all the time at the Capitol. Government belongs to those who show up. So, folks have to understand there is a tug of war going on, and either one side is going to win or the other. And if the other side is willing to say it more, to be more demonstrative about it, to be more public about it, we shouldn't be surprised that they win. Now, Beto O'Rourke did not win as far as it comes to that race, but he got pretty close. I mean,
a lot closer than I think a lot of people wondered.
And I think a lot of people feel like it should not have been that close, but it is, and I think that should tell us a lot about the state of affairs here in Texas when it comes not only to Republican, Democrat, but when it comes to the issues of faith and family, and you got to do the work.
I would certainly say so. We need to take a break, and when we come back, of course, one other issue is whether or not John Cornyn's going to have a kind of challenge like that. But more importantly, I want to make sure that when we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit of time about how you can support Texas values. One of the things, Jonathan, we've noticed is when we win, everybody goes away. When we lose, everybody goes away, and we don't want to go away. There are a lot of issues just because your guy won or your woman won.
That's right.
Or you're lost. Now's the time to get involved in some of these policy
and that's
issues.
right, because coming up next is the Texas legislative session in January. Now that the numbers are different at the Texas House, we got another big fight, and you can do something about this one. You don't have to wait 2 years.
And we also have State Board of Education issues we're going to talk about. So we have some action items and some marching orders. That happens right after these important messages.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If not, just sit back and take some notes. But I especially want to encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net. And as you do so, you can click on a picture of Jonathan, and then it will take you to the website, txvalues.org. Upper right-hand corner, Texas Faith and Family and Freedom Gala. But let me also, for just a minute, Jonathan, talk about the need for people to support you.
Yep.
We have noticed over the years that if our guy wins or our people win, then everybody goes, great, it's in good hands. We walk away and don't get involved for another 2 years. Or if we lose, we say, oh, that's the end of the republic, and they walk away and don't get involved. The most important thing we can do after voting is to stay connected.
Absolutely.
And the only way for people to have even a clue as to what's happening in the Texas legislature is to get your newsletter and to support you, right?
Absolutely right. And so, while you hear us talk a lot about Republican candidates and office holders that we think highly of, we're not a Republican organization. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We work on the issues of religious liberty, marriage and life, and marriage and family and pro-life. We do those in 3 arenas: the courts, the legislature, and the media. Okay. And so that's focused here in the state of Texas. And so, but the fact of the matter is, a lot of times when Republican candidates get elected, they're more likely to support some of the work that we do. But whether one is in or the other, our work does not change. We show up every day at the Texas Capitol through all 140 days of the legislative session. That starts in January. And so that's one of the reasons why we're having our gala on November 17th here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We want to educate people about the work we're doing so they can understand the importance, and then give them an opportunity to support us financially. But also, if you want to volunteer, you want to get involved, we just added 2 new members of our team to be prepared during the Texas legislative session. And what does that mean? Our office is 2 blocks from the state capitol. So we show up at committee hearings. We show up at floor votes. We show up every day and go to the offices, educating people. And then people come down to Austin, and our office is like a staging point. And so they come to our office, find out what the current issues are, what bills are being heard, and so on. And then we send them over to the Capitol, or we go with them. And on March 13th is going to be the Faith and Family Day at the Texas Capitol, where we're going to focus a lot on these issues. And so, but the time now is to invest in Texas values so we can be strong and hit the ground running when the session happens in January at the Texas legislature, at the Texas Capitol. And it's going to be a tougher session, too, I'm going to tell you, because with the Texas House numbers being 83-67, Republican-Democrat split, that usually is an indication of how close the numbers are going to be when it comes on critical votes on pro-life issues, on religious liberty issues. And so we're going to need more help, more advocates, and more resources. But if we have them, we can get the right work done, and we can have victory.
Well, again, txvalues.org. We have a link there, and I would encourage you to give, because I do, so I'm not asking you to do anything that I have not done. And certainly, even after this interview, I'm encouraged to do even more so. Let's talk about the Texas House for just a minute. We talked about the Senate, Texas Senate 31, Texas House 150, but you had 87, and people go, oh, that's good. You got it. No, because it's not like 87 around that table that call themselves Republicans agree with us, and there are some others that are Democrats that sort of agree with us. So the party labels work a little bit, but not exactly, and you have recognized that these are much closer votes because we've lost some key people. Let's mention a few. Matt Rinaldi's been on this program before, and he lost. While I'm having fun with the Matts, let's talk about this. Matt Shaheen just barely won, 50.5. A couple of other Matts just now announced, Matt Krause just announced, hey, we finally won. Even Jeff Leach, he's been on the program with us many times, it was like 51.5%. So these were all really close kind of races. And so as a result, some got in very close. Others did not get in. This is going to be important, and the first vote they're going to have is about Speaker of the House. Explain what that means.
Absolutely. And so in one of the races that we were watching was the one for a state House seat in Dallas where Lisa Luby Ryan
we've had her on before.
Did not win as well. And so, so what happens is the legislature convenes the first week of January. I think it's either the 7th or 8th this year. And the first vote that they take, the members do, is who's going to be the Speaker of the House. So that person is not on the ballot this November a few days ago. So the people don't directly vote for it, but you can have a say by talking to your Texas House member and saying, here's who I want. Now, with the Republicans having more numbers, it should be that you have a Republican speaker, and it's someone who
should be.
Yeah, should be. And it's someone who's picked by a majority of Republicans. So what happened with Joe Strauss, it was just a handful of Republicans, and then all the Democrats came on board, and he became the speaker. Even though Joe Strauss was a Republican by name, a lot of people felt like his policies did not indicate that. And in fact, there's discussion.
He killed a lot of bills that you believed in.
Right. And
Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he blocked a lot of legislation that was pro-life, that was pro-family, pro-religious liberty. So, but this vote is very important. So there's one thing's for sure. Joe Strauss is not going to be the speaker. So it will be someone completely new. And there are a handful of people that are already putting their name out there. And so that is very important, and that's going to come up very soon. As a matter of fact, the Republican caucus, we're told, is meeting on December 1st. That's less than a month away. And so don't get caught up too much in what happened with the elections. While there's reason for concern, that issue's over. The next one is what's going to happen at the Texas House and what happens at the Texas legislature as it relates to the Texas Capitol.
And again, I wanted to try to do an interview of some of those possible candidates for the speaker because we know what Joe Strauss has done or hasn't done is probably a better way to say that. And so that's important. What are some of the other key issues that the Texas House and Senate might be dealing with this session?
Sure. Well, and it's interesting to note for people to know that the Texas Senate is actually -1 when it comes to Republicans. Even though 2 Republicans lost on November, in September, there was a special election for a seat in South Texas where Pete Flores became the first Republican Hispanic to be elected to the Texas Senate. So you've got kind of a -1 there. So they still have more than a majority in the Texas Senate. So you're going to see really important issues related to the life issue, really important issues related to religious liberty. I mean, we've seen the attack on churches, on faith-based entities that continue to do things based on their beliefs. On their private property, they continue to get assaulted. Some of them, they're attacked as far as their views, not physically. But so because they believe in things regarding marriage, the way the Bible tells us between a man and a woman, and they're not telling people what they can do on their personal property, they're saying we don't want to be forced in our own property to do things that support some of those values that we don't agree with. And so people would have thought, oh, well, they're not going to be attacking churches for those things. Absolutely they are. That's what's going on. There's litigation right now where they're trying to force religious entities and churches to pay for people to have sex changes and things of that nature. And so it's clear that without state legislation that makes it clear, like in the case of Jack Phillips, who's trying to be forced to use his business to support things like same-sex marriage, even though there's a Supreme Court case on that, there's still people that are trying to say, well, it didn't go this far and this is not really where things stand. If you don't have a specific in state law, people are going to still attack people and lead them to believe that they could be hauled into court. And so those are just a few of the things that you're going to see. And we've seen these things happen on college campuses where people that have faith and family views are not being treated fairly as well. So those things are going to come up. Some of these issues are coming up next week at the State Board of Education as well.
Yes. Just before we get to the State Board of Education, you don't think that they would ever try to subpoena the sermons of pastors or anything like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. We don't, Kerby, we don't even have to use hypotheticals even more.
I know.
People used to say, oh, well, that's slippery slope.
If I had said that 5 years ago, people go, that is not a chance.
Yeah.
And then it happened.
And that is the reality. As much as I don't like to come to terms with it, if you will, or I don't, it's not something I'm happy about. That is the reality. And if we don't do something about it, it's just going to get worse.
Well, again, you mentioned State Board of Education. And again, we tried to do some focus on that. And I'm really wanting to depend on what is happening there. Anybody that's familiar with you knows that in the past, you've been very much involved in all sorts of things, whether it's the Bible curriculum in the schools, whether it's the science issues. But now we're talking about the social studies and history. And that's really important because as we talked about on this program the other day, there were some that were suggesting we couldn't even talk about those who died at the Alamo being heroes. So again, you don't have to make up hypotheticals. There's just some really bizarre things out there right now.
And oftentimes they go farther than I would expect in a hypothetical and make you realize that there's no exaggeration to what we're up against and what some people's views are that are drastically different. Kerby, look, going back over 10 years, I've been involved in work at the State Board of Education. You're talking about an entity and a group of elected officials that have an impact on what's taught in our public schools across the state. We've got over 2,000 school districts, over 6 million public school students. And before you stop yourself and say, oh, well, my kid's not in public school, so I'm not that concerned about it, it will impact you as well. A lot of private schools base their curriculum on what the state curriculum is and the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skill, the TEKS. And a lot of homeschoolers use Texas history and certain things as their own curriculum. So don't allow yourself to think that it doesn't apply to you. It certainly does. And here's what's happening. Starting tomorrow, you can sign up to testify next week, because next week the State Board of Education is going to do their last round about deciding their final votes on what's taught on history and social studies. Here's what was being attacked. To your point, not calling the Alamo defenders heroic, not even teaching William Travis's letter, not making references to our Judeo-Christian values, not recognizing Moses as having something to do with law and government. All those things were on the table, and they've been taught for so long, and people want to stop it. But you can make sure we continue to teach those things if you get involved at txvalues.org.
And again, I would encourage you to go to the website and follow that. We'll be talking about it as well. When we come back, we'll also talk about the gala again. I've got some comments from Michelle Bachman, and you'll have a chance to hear that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Liberty Christian Center in Watertown, New York, asked for permission to use the Watertown High School cafeteria for its religious services. As their application stated, the worship services to be conducted in the public school cafeteria would include activities of music, religious instruction, and Christian testimony. But the local school board denied the application, stating that since New York law did not specifically authorize religious organizations to utilize public school buildings, the application had to be denied. The court reviewed previous uses of the public school cafeteria. It found that among other uses, the school had been used to host a local talent night, which featured religious music, religious instruction, and even Christian testimony. Since both the worship service and the local talent show shared a religious purpose and context, it was unlawful for the school to permit the talent show but deny the use of the facility for a worship service. Some decry the use of a public school by a religious organization as a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. That is simply not true. The First Amendment demands that the school board be neutral toward religion. Letting a secular organization use school property but denying a religious organization the same use is not neutrality, it's hostility. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, Jonathan Saenz with us, president of Texas Values. And again, one of the things we're talking about, and I wanted to make sure I talked about it again in case you weren't listening to the first part of the program, is we have the Texas Faith and Family and Freedom Gala, which will be taking place a week from this Saturday. Now, again, there is this flash sale either today or tomorrow. So if you say, well, I don't know if I can afford it, 50% off, I'm always looking for a deal. And the keynote speaker is Michelle Bachmann. And I thought of nothing else for just a minute. Let's hear Michelle Bachmann because she has been listening to Point of View since a very young age.
I was about 19 years old when I first met my husband, and he brought me out to the farm in Wisconsin where he lived with his parents. And every day at noontime, the radio came on, and my in-laws had the radio tuned to the Christian radio station, and it was Marlon Maddox's Point of View that came on. So I was still getting my footing for my faith. And this was very important because what Point of View taught me was the intersection of current events with my faith in Jesus Christ. And I just loved the show. I loved Marlon Maddox's personality. He was cutting edge. All the new things that you'd hear about in the news, he would be talking about on the radio station, but from a biblical worldview perspective. He very profoundly shaped a lot of my thinking during that time, and we couldn't wait to listen to it. Kerby does such a fabulous job. I've enjoyed being on the show with Kerby. It's needed now more than ever because it seems like too few pastors are willing to say from the pulpit what they need to say today. That's why I think that Kerby Anderson, what he's doing on Point of View, is probably more needed now than ever because we need to be hearing this on the radio if we aren't going to be getting it from our pulpits.
Well, again, Michelle Bachmann is going to be the keynote speaker, and we've known her indirectly since she was 19 years of age. I remember
she looks 19 on this picture.
I know, which is good for her. And I remember back in the 1990s, Jonathan, when Penna Dexter and I did an interview with then homemaker Michelle Bachmann, who was starting to get involved in these education issues, the State Board of Education there up where she lives, and in Minnesota. And so it was just kind of interesting then to see her run for the Minnesota legislature, then for Congress, then even for the presidency. And you're going to have her there Saturday night, and you just will enjoy meeting her. What a delightful individual, right?
She is. No, and we're very excited to have her. And she's continued her work on faith, family, and freedom issues. Yes. She's now on the board of Family Research Council, which is really like a national version of Texas Values, or I should say we're like a state version of what Family Research Council does. She's distinguished herself very well. She's going to be very excited to find out that you're going to be our MC for the event. Kerby Anderson's going to MC our Texas Faith, Family, and Freedom Gala on November 17th. So we are excited. And as a matter of fact, the last time I saw her was in D.C. Her and Tony Perkins were on their way to go meet with Vice President Pence to talk about some very important issues. So I know that she continues to use her time very well. You know, she's a mother, I think, of 24 kids that they were foster parents for. And so she's been a warrior for religious liberty. And I think when Ted Cruz first became a U.S. Senator, they called him the Michelle Bachmann of the Senate. If that gives you any idea about her personality. And so I can imagine she's going to have a lot of important things to say about how the state of Texas and the nation moves forward after these important elections.
Well, I know she's going to say some very nice things about you because she understands that these various family policy groups around the country, and yours, let's just give you credit, is the largest of these family policy groups around the country. And we had a list that was available to individuals, so whether they were in the state of Texas or in Minnesota, California, New York, or whatever, they could connect up with those. But for our listeners in Texas right now, you just got to get involved with Texas Values and don't think that, well, I voted and I don't really need to pay attention for another 2 years. No, now's the time to get involved because some very important pieces of legislation are going to be put forward and voted on up or down in the Texas legislature. You've got the State Board of Education, and of course they've looked at science curriculum in the past. Now they're looking at social science curriculum. And as you said, these TEKs, you might say, well, again, as you said, I don't have public school kids. Well, guess what? A lot of these tests, even the SAT test, people say, well, I don't care about Common Core because I don't have any kids in school there. Guess what? Those Common Core ideas show up in the SAT test and the ACT test. So, and besides, you're paying for this with your tax dollars. So we need to be involved in the educational issues, don't we?
Absolutely. And Kerby, a lot of people, and for your listeners in other parts of the country, a lot of the curriculum in textbooks that are used in Texas, they use in other parts of the country because the textbook publishers and curriculum publishers don't want to, kind of fashion one for all 50 states. And so they use the ones that are bought the most. And, newsflash, Texas is one of the biggest states, so they buy most or a large portion of those type of textbooks and materials, and so they're customized a little bit more to Texas. You might be in another state, and you're kind of getting, what's happening out of Texas, so just a little bit more reason for people to be involved on these issues. And to your point about being a family policy council, there's about 40 family policy councils across the state. It's a network, and it comes out of an association relationship with Focus on the Family.
Right.
And so whatever state you're in, Minnesota, Wisconsin, California, wherever people may be listening outside the state of Texas, there's probably an organization in that state that, whether it has it in its name or not, it's considered a family policy council. So our group is called Texas Values. It's not called the Texas Values Family Policy Council, but some groups do have that phrase in their name, and it's really important to us and an honor to be associated with Focus on the Family.
Well, and of course, you came out of the work that you did with Kelly Shackelford. And of course, I followed you for some time. Kelly Shackelford and I now are both in the Hope Center, but I remember a time when I used to go up to, 18th Avenue, go up the stairs, and you guys were up there. And I said, why don't you come over here? They're going to be developing the Hope Center. So now he's on the first floor and the second floor. So instead of having to get in a car and drive and going to see him, I just go up and down the elevator, see these people. I'm sorry I don't get to Austin more often, but we really need to get some people to be with you in Austin. So let's see if we can use this radio show to have the turnout, because when Wendy Davis was speaking, that goes back a few years ago, there were all sorts of people in the gallery, and it made it look like all of Texas is pro-abortion. And that was not the case. So we need to get our people to show up for some of those events, don't we?
Absolutely. And look, I was real comfortable. I was living in Collin County, and, it's Kelly Shackelford's fault that I now have to live in Austin. And I say that just in tongue in cheek. Look, I have to tell you, it's hard to think of one person that has had the impact on my personal career and my professional development than Kelly Shackelford is. And it's such an honor that he serves on the board of Texas Values. He is going to be a part of the program of our Faith, Family, and Freedom Gala on November 17th here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where we're broadcasting out of. And there's an award that we give out in his name, the Kelly Shackelford Award. You're going to want to find out who gets that award that night. We're not telling people until then. And, because we got to a point, Kelly Shackelford gets so many awards. He's one of the finest religious liberty lawyers and gentlemen in the country. And so, you figure, well, we need to just name an award after him, okay? He's got such a distinction. But it was his idea and the board idea to say, you know what, we need to have a presence in Austin. It's not really good enough sometimes just to drive down there from Dallas on a moment's notice. So I went down there for the session in 2007. I realized we got to have a presence here year round. So now our office is 2 blocks from the Capitol. I split off from First Liberty on good terms, and then Kelly Shackelford helped me start our 501c3 Texas Values. So we just focus on Texas. We do need more people to come down, okay? And I know it's tough, but that trip, is not that far from Dallas, Houston, wherever you're going to come from, and it makes a difference when people show up in person at the Texas Capitol. The legislators don't forget. The session starts in January, so start thinking about when you're going to come down.
Yes. Well, I've been a lobbyist in another state, and I can tell you again that it makes a difference when you got some people that show up at a hearing or a committee hearing or an event or a rally. So, again, we're going to do our best to promote that. And, Jonathan, I just feel a lot more comfortable knowing that you're in Austin. And I can relate to what you're saying. I was born in Berkeley. When I go to Austin, it feels familiar.
Yeah. Well, look, we all have our role, and I consider it an honor and a pleasure and a huge responsibility to do the work that we do for Faith, Family, and Freedom that Texas Values does. Our team is now made up of 10 members. We have grown every year. One of the ways that we continue to be successful is the event we're having like on November 17th here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but it's also because we have friends and relationships with people like you, Kerby, and Point of View. We couldn't do the work without everybody being involved.
txvalues.org. We'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to, in just a minute, be talking with our good friend Dr. Kevin Leman, because I know some of us need a bit of a break from the elections. But a little bit later this hour, and certainly next hour, we're going to be talking about everything in the news. A very somber day indeed when we talk about 12 dead as a result of a masked gunman going into a California country bar. We'll talk more about what happened there and PTSD and some of the other issues that are associated with that. Yesterday, during our Millennial Roundtable, Nick Pitts and I talked about Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, leaving as Attorney General and talking about what that might mean. If you haven't paid attention, of course, there is all the issue about the White House suspending the press credentials for CNN's Jim Acosta. And speaking of some of the conflict, you also have a number of protesters showing up at Tucker Carlson's home, maybe even cracking the door a little bit. And as well, we'll get into some of the other implications now that we have resolved a few more of those races involving both the House and the Senate. And we have posted some articles about that on our website, pointofview.net. So we'll get into all of that in just a minute. But I thought it would be a wonderful break to focus on some things that will be helpful to you as you're raising your children, or for those of you that are older, maybe advice you can give to your children on how to raise your grandchildren. And back in 1984, a book came out which is still in print, now more than 1 million copies nationwide, worldwide, Making Children Mind Without Losing Yours. And it has been so successful, and it was, of course, written by Dr. Kevin Leman, internationally known psychologist, best-selling author, and an individual that we have enjoyed having on this program for many years. And Dr. Kevin Leman, always great to have you on Point of View.
Well, Kerby, listening to that intro, you've got a lot of material to work with through the Point of View. My goodness, so many things are happening in the world, and quite frankly, as you know, some of them are very bad. So I'm glad to visit with you again, my friend.
Well, it's been good to have you in studio. It's been good to have you by phone. And take you back to 1984 for just a minute. When you wrote this book, of course you assumed it was going to sell millions of copies and still be in print in 2018. Probably not. But again, it is amazing that this has resonated with whole generations of parents who look at the situations that they have in which they say, Johnny, if I tell you one more time, I'm going to come up there, or 1, 2, 3. And we've seen all sorts of parents not taking your advice, and many of us are subjected to them at airports and grocery stores and everything else. So maybe that's exactly why you still have now, of course, a revised edition. Talk about some of the differences. I saw words like opioids and things in here, and OxyContin. None of that was around in 1984, was it?
Oh, Kerby, you know as well as I do, the world has changed. It's a different place. And you know as a published author that, you know, sometimes I'll give your listening audience some clues. Even a Christian publisher will say a book is revised, and what that means is it was given a lick and a holler and a few changes were made. I want to assure you that's not what happened with Making Children Mind Without Losing Yours. I went into that book and did a thorough revision from head to toe, so to speak. It's interesting because, as you say, that book was birthed the year before the birth order book came out.
Yes.
Way back in 1984, and I did a slight revision once around the year 2000, but just last year, this past year, I did a complete revision of Making Children Mine Without Losing Yours, and it has passed the test of time because it jettisoned to the head of the bestseller list as soon as it came out last August. But here's what I want your listening audience to think about. Here's the question of the day on Point of View. Is God an authoritarian? Is God an authoritarian? Now, before you say yes, let me remind you of a few things. Almighty God is the supreme authority. His scripture says every knee shall what? Shall bow. So we're not worshiping a mamby-pamby God. We're talking about the creator of the universe. But does God grab us by the scruff of the neck, twist our earlobe, and say, you will do what I tell you to do? No, that's not who God is. And he certainly isn't the permissive God who in parent form says, Melanie, it's 8 o'clock. Have you chosen to go to bed yet? So what I'm trying to paint a word picture for your listening audience is there's three types of parents. There's the authoritarian, which almost everybody in our listening audience grew up with. Hey, you're going to do what I tell you to do as long as you live under this house. Hey, you want something to cry about? I'll give you something to cry about. Don't make me come over there. I mean, almost all of us are saying, oh, that's me, Leman, that's me. Well,
authoritarian parent.
They're still around.
Yeah.
And they're still around in the church in good numbers. But the permissive parents, Dr. Leman, Ralph and I feel very strongly about this. We believe every child should be a winner, and so we've enrolled Melissa in non-competitive soccer.
Yeah.
I mean, let me get my hurl bag out when I hear that kind of stuff. And so I think what's made Making Children Mind the cornerstone book in rearing children is it points out to the parent, hey, what we grew up with and thought was right and just telling kids what to do is not reflective of who God the Father is. And so we want to be an authority without being an authoritarian, and certainly without being a permissive. And I think that's what's made that book so usable, practical, and popular over the years.
One of the things I appreciate is not only do you give us the general stuff, and that is an authoritative parent has consistent, loving discipline, holds the child accountable, conveys respect, self-worth, and love. But all those are great words, but if you're not an abstract thinker, you can go to the next chapter and you say, well, here's what parents say, here's how the child perceives it, here's a better response, and here's how you can help that. So whether you can pick up on those big abstract words or get down to some really specific kinds of things, that's another reason why I think this book connects, is because I sometimes finish a book or even hear a sermon and I go, I have not a clue as to how to apply this. And you take the time not only to give us the general principles, but you give us real specifics. And that's why I think so many parents have purchased this book and have found it so helpful in the past.
Yeah, Kerby, there's always humor in Leman books, and I find it really funny. I mean, I laugh out loud sometimes at some of the things I say, which I'm not sure what that means, but I do.
Yep.
And there's a similarity between us husbands and kids. Husbands hate questions.
Yes.
Husbands hate the why word. Husbands aren't the talkers usually in families. It's our brides. They use 3.5 times the number of words that we use in a given day. And so part of what I try to teach parents is, hey, parents, lighten up on the questioning. If you want to know something, how about this? You're talking to your child now. Honey, I'd love to know your opinion about this or that. They'll talk your ear off.
We'll take a break and continue our conversation with Dr. Kevin Leman, Making Your Kids' Mind Without Losing Yours. We have information on our website at Point of View. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Congress has lots of unfinished business. One important item is prison and sentencing reform. The House of Representatives has already passed the First Step Act. It is time for the Senate to do the same. Recently, I had Rebecca Hagelin on Point of View Radio Talk Show to talk about her commentary on our failing prisons and faulty war on drugs. A few months ago, I had Star Parker on to talk about the same legislation. These women will admit that they have been known as being tough on crime, but both of them also realize locking up parents of kids for years for nonviolent drug offenses is doing more damage to society than good. Our current federal laws require mandatory sentences for nonviolent drug offenses. Often the people we throw into prison for 2 decades are low-level dealers, not drug kingpins, who we really need to get off the streets. Sadly, they receive little or no vocational training and little in the way of drug rehabilitation. No wonder the recidivism rate in America is so high. President Trump has made this issue one of his most important issues. Jared Kushner has been given the responsibility to push the legislation forward. It passed the House of Representatives back in May with overwhelming bipartisan support, and when it reached the Senate Judiciary Committee, senators added some modest common-sense sentencing reform initiatives. To those who say that this is merely an attempt to be weak on crime, Rebecca Hagelin has a response. A very small percentage of arrests for drug distribution involve major drug traffickers. Most of the arrests are for small-time, nonviolent offenders. Many of them are addicts who turn to selling drugs to support their habit. Warehousing them in prison for years at taxpayer expense makes little sense. That's why it's time for the Senate to vote on this sensible piece of legislation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Pleased to have with us for just a little bit longer Dr. Kevin Leman. Again, New York Times best-selling author, Making Children Mind Without Losing Yours, a revised edition, which I really appreciate because he includes things about social media and a number of other things that did not exist when the book came out in 1984. We have a link to drleman.com if you want to know more, but you can find this book in your local bookstore, no doubt. Published by Revell, which is a division of Baker Publishing House. And you used a good question, and that is we certainly want to get some feedback from our kids. But if we simply ask tough questions or how was school today? Fine. What happened? Nothing. You're never going to get a good answer. But if you ask for an opinion, and maybe you can begin the conversation that is so vital, especially as they get a little bit older and they don't really want to talk to their parents that much, you have to work a little harder to try to keep that conversation going, don't you?
Yes, and anybody, Kerby, who has teenagers knows that you may do what Leman says to do, and you might say, honey, I'd love to know your opinion about whatever, and they might just give you a grunt and a groan and sort of roll their eyes and walk away. But at 10:30 at night, all of a sudden they're in their bed, in your bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, and now they want to talk. And that's the way teenagers are. So you've got to roll with the punches, but again, there's not many husbands who love the word why. Again, men basically don't like the questions. And so if you want your husband to talk, ladies, just simply learn to ask for their opinion, and they will talk your ear off. And by the way, this is a sidebar for all ladies listening. Is your husband capable of saying something really dumb and stupid? Now, no one's watching, so just answer it in your heart and mind. Now, when your husband says something really dumb as mud, my suggestion, just look at them and say, wow. Wow.
Wow.
Fascinating.
It's so good.
Don't go. It's hard enough to become one in marriage without looking for trouble. But my point is, with making children mine without losing yours, kids are hedonistic little suckers. And they're hedonistic little suckers from the get-go. The first thing they say when they're born ought to be a clue. Wah. And so that kid is going to test your authority. And if you got a strong-willed child, a powerful little buzzard, as I like to call him, he or she might have a meltdown, throw a temper tantrum in the mall because you won't get him a treat. And what's a parent to do? And my advice is clear. Step over the child. Realize there's a temptation to step on that little 3-year-old. That's illegal. That's very bad. Don't do that. Walk over them. But then watch what happens. That little tyke comes after you. He might throw a belly flop in front of you to try again because he's saying, hey, parent, I'm in charge here. And what St. Paul told us in the 6th chapter of the book of Ephesians is this. He says, children, obey your parents. It's the right thing to do because God has placed them in authority over you. And so we are in authority. And parents, you have all the aces in your back pocket. You have all the gold in your back pocket. Today, your son or daughter wouldn't have underwear on, quite frankly, if you didn't buy it for them. So who's kidding who?
That's right.
So let the kids give back to the family. Let them work. But don't bring them up as the center of the universe, because if you do, and most families do that today, Kerby, you're really setting your kid up for big-time failure, especially spiritually.
I agree. I've always said that in your book, the chapter that certainly was so helpful to a lot of parents, including us, Chapter 8, How to Act When They Act Up, and that was preceded by Chapter 3, Why Kids Do What They Do. So once you understand motivation and then you understand how you react to it, that's really important. And you've already, of course, talked about the 3 different kinds of parents, because you have the authoritarian parent and the permissive parent, but you want to be the authoritative parent. And you're not just playing with words. You're really talking about how you respond. And there is a need sometimes to recognize who the parent is and who the child is. And so you even have a chapter there on tough love and those kinds of things that have been so necessary, especially when we seem to be raising a whole generation of snowflakes. We do a millennial roundtable, Kevin Leman, on Wednesday. We did it yesterday. And when we get these millennials together, these are very atypical millennials. They're pretty mature. They're pretty responsible. But they'll admit that there is a whole generation of millennials, now iGen generation, that just are so snowflake driven because you have the helicopter parents or the snowplow parents. And so it's important for us to come back and recognize who the parent is in this particular situation.
Yeah, I just did an op-ed for Fox News in New York. Somebody came up with a term, lawnmower parents.
Oh, yes.
And I responded, I wrote the piece for them, but I said, I've been talking about this for a good 35 years. Don't snow plow the roads of life for your children. And you can stand behind your child and have his back, and you can stand next to your child and, help him through life. But what you can't do is stand in front of your child. And parents just need to understand that parenting, I'll give you, it's not easy, okay? But I stand firm on this. It's simple. Our mutual friend, Josh McDowell,
yes.
I love Josh.
Mm-hmm.
And Josh said one profound thing in his entire life. He said, rules without relationship lead to rebellion.
That's right.
And I stole that from Josh years ago. I've been using it ever since because it makes so much sense. And for those parents who tend to be authoritarian, it's my way or the highway, you have to realize you're planting the seeds of rebellion in your child's heart. And for those of you who are knocking yourself out, I'm speaking in Albuquerque, New Mexico this weekend, and I'm telling you, Kerby, I'll have parents come up to me and say, oh, Dr. Leman, we are so glad you're here. We too want happy, happy, happy children. And I'm going to quote myself from a book called Have a New Kid by Friday. An unhappy child is a healthy child. So there's times your son or daughter parent needs to feel unhappy. Why? Because they deserve to be unhappy. They ragged on their brother, their sister, they stole something, they lied. There's nothing wrong with your kid being unhappy. So what I'm saying is we're rearing an adult or rearing a kid so that they mature and end up being a kid that the whole world can be proud of when they hit 18, 19 years of age.
Just before we run out of time, let's talk about the last chapter, because some people say, well, I want to be my child's best friend. And chapter 13 is how to really be your child's best friend. And you talk about things like be a good listener, an active listener, and certainly give encouragement and the rest. But there needs to be the proper boundaries and rules so that you really can be your child's best friend, but in a way that is healthy rather than one that is debilitating. True?
Right. Yeah. You know, and since we're short of time, let me talk about listening. My newest book is a book called When Your Kid is Hurting.
Yes.
And I point out in that book that you really need to be a listener without judgment. Anybody who's married will tell you that feelings draw you together and judgments push you apart. And so many times as parents, we listen to kids and we hear something and we're so quick to correct them. We're always shoulding on our kids. I call those women who are shoulders the Martha Luthers of life, Kerby, because they are the great reformers. And when you hear your kid say something that you disagree with or you think he's going down the wrong track, you just pounce on that thing. And as soon as you pounce on your kid, you've shut down the communication. So when a kid says to you he wants to go to a rock concert 60 miles away on the interstate with another 16-year-old driver, hey, I can answer that question. No, you're not going. Is my suggestion? No, my suggestion is listen to him. And say, listen, that must be an important group. I mean, you must love them. Hey, you don't have anything you could download that I could hear. I'd love to hear their music. At that point, your kid will all about fall out of the car. Or if he turns the music on loud and you turn to him and you say, honey, do me a favor, turn that up. I mean, they'll look at you like, did he just say turn it up? And what I'm saying is, hear your kids out.
Right.
Listen to them. And when they feel like my mom and dad really care about me, they might go back to the peer group and say, my dad and mom won't let me go. And I don't mind being the fall guy for my kid.
Very good.
I don't mind being the excuse for my kid if it'll help them in the peer group, because that's a tough time. But I think your audience will appreciate, Leman books in general. They tend to be fun to, I got a need to make people laugh, I guess.
Yeah. Well, again, When Your Kid is Hurting is one on your website, Making Children Mine Without Losing Yours. Kevin Leman, always great to be with you. We'll do it again soon. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Kerby. Bye-bye.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story. He goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Wanted to give you a chance to hear from Kevin Leman because that new book is out, and that is a revised version, and it's new enough that I would actually say, even if you have an old copy, you might want this one because he's added all sorts of material, because we live in a world today of social media. We live in a world today of drug abuse that is much worse than it was in the 1980s, and so let me just commend that to you. But let's get back into the news. I honestly thought we'd spend a fair amount of time talking about the election today. That's one of 6 topics I will try to cover over the next 90 minutes. But let's start with the one that is just so painful to think about. That is what happened and then who this individual is. We now know his name, Ian Long, 28 years of age, who massacred 12 people in a county music bar in Southern California. That happened last night. He's an ex-Marine. I'll talk more about him in just a minute. As many people have said, plagued with PTSD, terrified his mother and even neighbors. So this is a person that could have been committed, but you would have to have committed him involuntarily. And so there is the issue of that, which we'll get to in just a minute. Opened fire at what's called the Borderline Bar and Grill in Thousand Oaks on Wednesday night during what's called the College County Night, where students from nearby schools, and some of those were like Pepperdine and some others, were able to line dance and listen to music. Even though this is a bar, if I think I've read earlier that if you were under the age of 25, you get an X on your hand, so you can't drink, but you can still be part of that event. Anyway, Ian Long has a Glock 45 caliber with an extended magazine, used it to kill 11 people. He came up to the bouncer, opened fires on him, then after that begins to throw smoke grenades into the crowds, in which it confused individuals. I think he also, if I remember reading somewhere there, shot the teller there as well. So before he even came in, already had shot 2 people. Then later on shoots a sheriff's sergeant who was the first on the scene, 54-year-old Robert Hellis, who died in the hospital later on. Before the SWAT teams entered the building, though, he took his own life in an office inside. He purchased the 45 caliber Glock legally. And again, we will probably have lots of people calling for gun control, and I'm always willing to have a conversation about this. But again, how do we limit an individual like this from having access to a handgun if it is purchased legally? Do we then eliminate anybody with PTSD? Was there any indication when he left the Marines that he had PTSD? Was there any indication from the mental health specialists that they could remove guns from him? Those are, I think, really important questions. Of course, some will say, well, he shouldn't have had a gun in the first place. He shouldn't have had an extended magazine. This is, of course, in the state of California, where those limits, interestingly enough, are much more rigorous than they are in other states as well. Served in the Marines, by the way, between 2008 and 2013, awarded 10 medals and toured Afghanistan. The people that saw him shooting said he looked like he knew what he was doing, repeatedly fired a gun without saying a word. And so let's, if we can, talk a little bit about Ian Long. In April, the police and mental health specialists were called to Long's home after neighbors heard crashes coming from inside. They decided at that time he was not qualified to be committed involuntarily, and so as a result left him at home with his mother. Now, neighbors had said that she lived in fear that he was going to harm himself, and there were those who actually were with him in college, because after he left the Marines, he actually was studying athletic training at California State University in Northridge. He did, as I might point out, drop out in 2016, 2 years ago, but his college roommate at the time said that he was mean, that he was a loner, that sometimes he would go and dance in the garage alone. And so those are just a few things we know about him and the circumstances. Again, it's very sad that not only do, of course, we have the individuals inside the bar, 11 of them killed, but then you have 13 dead because you have the sergeant and the other individuals as part of this. One says 13, one says 12. I don't know if we've lost one since this came out, but nevertheless, as I pointed out, this was not necessarily a bar where everybody was drinking, because college students oftentimes go there and they just have a black X stamped on their hands, which prevents them from being able to drink, but allows them to dance and be part of the event. Many of the students were from Christian schools. One of those was Pepperdine, and I think another one was one of the Lutheran schools there as well. So that just is a little bit of what we know in terms of the shooting. You, of course, are going to be hearing lots of calls for gun control. But again, I just keep asking the question, which I think is a reasonable question. What kind of common sense regulations, what kind of common sense laws could be implemented which would prevent this individual from obtaining legally a .45 caliber Glock? So if you'd like to join us on that issue, it's just one of 6 we're going to be talking about here today. I would love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. And I might mention that one of our booklets that we have made available here at Point of View is a booklet I put together on the Second Amendment, which kind of gets into the details of what does the Second Amendment allow, what are the limitations, why should somebody be able to have a semi-automatic handgun or a rifle or something of that nature. In this case, it was, of course, a concealable handgun with an extended magazine, which, as I understand, he actually had modified himself, perhaps because it's hard to get an extended magazine when you're in the state of California. So those are a couple of questions we will address, and I see some phone calls coming in, so we'll get to those in just a minute. But let me take on one other issue, which is just the second of 6 that we're going to talk about today. And that is, yesterday we mentioned the fact that the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, resigned. Looks like now he was pretty much forced out. Now, again, in a letter to President Donald Trump, Sessions wrote that he had been honored to serve as Attorney General, work to implement the law enforcement agenda based on the rule of law that formed a central part of your campaign for the presidency. So he, for the moment, is replaced by the acting Attorney General, who is Matthew Whitaker, who has been the chief of staff for Jeff Sessions. And, of course, then you have a tweet that came out from Donald Trump saying that we thank the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, for his service, wish him well. A permanent replacement will be nominated at a later date. You might think, well, then no real controversy other than the fact that Jeff Sessions sat out. But, of course, the controversy begins instantaneously. First of all, some are saying, well, this is like a slow motion Saturday night massacre. I'll explain the significance of that in just a few minutes. But the real issue that surfaced almost immediately is the fact that Matthew Whitaker, who has served as the chief of staff for Jeff Sessions, has been somewhat critical of the Mueller investigation. So just as you've had Jeff Sessions, who recused himself from the investigation of Russian interference, which was part of the Mueller investigation, you now have others that are saying then this particular acting Attorney General, Matthew Whitaker, should recuse himself. But I don't see any reason that he should. And so, of course, you're going to have the point-counterpoint taking place over the next couple of days. The special counsel probe right now is overseen by the Deputy Attorney General. That would be Rod Rosenstein, who has had, of course, very strained relationships with Donald Trump, as I think we've talked about here as well. And, of course, the idea that an individual who has been somewhat critical of the Mueller investigation now would be the acting Attorney General certainly is an issue that will be part of some of the point-counterpoint and debate over the next couple of days. Although I think that some of that is going to be overshadowed by this issue of the shooting that took place in California. And another issue, which I haven't even gotten to yet, and that is the decision of the White House suspending the press credentials for CNN's Jim Acosta. So it will be interesting to see how much airtime is going to be given to whether or not Matthew Whitaker should actually recuse himself and see whether or not that's an issue that will actually have, as they say in the news business, some legs, or whether it becomes sort of a one-day story because of so many other things taking place. So let's take a break. When we come back, I think some of you want to address the issue of the Second Amendment and gun control. That's certainly a relevant topic. I've put on the table Jeff Sessions. We've yet to get to a discussion about whether or not CNN's Jim Acosta should have his press credentials pulled, at least temporarily. And then, of course, we've had the assault on Tucker Carlson's home. And then, of course, some other things that have happened which have now been resolved in both the House and Senate races, which are going to make some difference next year. Got a lot to cover. We'll do all that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Liberty Christian Center in Watertown, New York, asked for permission to use the Watertown High School cafeteria for its religious services. As their application stated, the worship services to be conducted in the public school cafeteria would include activities of music, religious instruction, and Christian testimony. But the local school board denied the application, stating that since New York law did not specifically authorize religious organizations to utilize public school buildings, the application had to be denied. The court reviewed previous uses of the public school cafeteria. It found that among other uses, the school had been used to host a local talent night, which featured religious music, religious instruction, and even Christian testimony. Since both the worship service and the local talent show shared a religious purpose and context, it was unlawful for the school to permit the talent show but deny the use of the facility for a worship service. Some decry the use of a public school by a religious organization as a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. That is simply not true. The First Amendment demands that the school board be neutral toward religion. Letting a secular organization use school property but denying a religious organization the same use is not neutrality, it's hostility. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Put two issues on the table. More to come as these 2 hours actually unfold. But one of those, again, is the shooting that took place with Ian Long, 28 years of age, at the Borderline Bar and Grill in Thousand Oaks. And Andrew, our engineer, reminded me of some material that is available, because he had found it here at the Giffords Law Center. If you look at the 50 states and evaluate their laws, the ones that have the strongest laws against guns, which have the strongest gun control legislation, are almost all either East Coast, which would be New Jersey and New York and Pennsylvania and Connecticut, or California. It turns out that their estimate is California has the strongest laws, even stronger than even those in the Northeast. So if you look at, number 1, that's California. Number 2 is New Jersey. I think number 3 is Connecticut. Number 4 is Massachusetts. Number 5 is New York, and all of that. If you look at those, they're seen as the weakest laws. Well, that's usually Arizona, Mississippi, Missouri, things like that. I've seen that before. So the bottom line is that it's even possible the reason he modified his magazine, it's very difficult, I think, in the state of California to get a magazine for, say, a Glock 45 caliber, which actually has more than 10 rounds. So let's see where we go on that. I see some of you want to talk about guns. I think some of you want to talk about PTSD. Some of you want to talk about drugs and the side effects of some of these psychotropic drugs. So all of that is relevant. We've also put on the table a comment about Jeff Sessions. A little bit later, maybe in the next hour, we'll get into whether or not the White House was wise in suspending the press credentials for CNN's Jim Acosta. While we're talking about the media, what happens when these so-called anti-fascist protesters show up at the home of Tucker Carlson's and threaten his wife? And then, of course, we have some more resolution of some House and especially Senate races, which I think in terms of the Senate mean good things for Donald Trump and these judicial nominees. And in terms of the Democrats, suggest who will be some of the committee heads in the House of Representatives. So we got a lot to talk about, and all of that will be part of our conversation next hour. But this hour, let's take a few phone calls. We'll start in the state of Georgia on the Good News Network. Jonathan, what's your point of view?
Hey, Kerby, how are you today?
I'm good. I appreciate you calling in.
Good. You were asking earlier about point of view or opinion on the gun laws there in California. The gist of it, my belief, I'm certainly no expert on it, but I am a concealed carrier myself, and just that fact alone requires you to be way more situationally aware than say your normal citizen, not buried in your phone and such like that. But anyway, a quote that I've heard, and I couldn't remember or find where it originated from just in the few minutes I was on hold. But the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, and that's pretty much universal. The vast majority of concealed carrier holders across the nation create even fewer mistakes and even less problems than law enforcement officers. It's not going against law enforcement officers, but it speaks a lot to those that are legally have a weapon. They treat it with, most of the time, really, really careful with it. And there's instance after instance after instance where a concealed carrier will stop a active shooter or a robbery. Just look up do a quick Google search. You'll see.
Look at the work by John Lott. Just type in the name John, L-O-T-T. He's been on the program with us, and he's documented this because a lot of people say, well, concealed carry, they haven't been that effective. Well, lots of times it's just by drawing your weapon, the person runs away. Not all those get reported, but there are very good examples of where in many, many cases, we're talking about millions that John Lott has documented, in which just demonstrating that you have a weapon stops a possible confrontation. In other cases where those individuals, even though they are not law enforcement and do not receive the kind of training law enforcement do, tend to be fairly accurate and very successful in terms of stopping that. And so it's a good classic illustration that if you want to stop a bad guy with a gun, getting a good guy with a gun, whether that good guy is law enforcement or that good guy is somebody that's a concealed carry holder, is going to make the difference in that particular situation. Of course, if you are the sheriff and you show up in this case and he sees you coming, he gets shot first. And so we lost a law enforcement officer in that case. So I'm not saying that in every case we always are coming out successful and save the lives of law enforcement individuals, or that even some concealed carry people have not been shot. But generally, we have much lower crime in places where individuals are carrying a weapon, because just think about that. If you're a bad guy, Jonathan, and you break into a house, or you come into, in this particular case, a bar and grill, and you're not sure there's somebody there that could be carrying and shoot back at you, might, at least for the rational person, cause you to stop. In this case, we're dealing with somebody with PTSD, and he may not have been thinking rationally, but still, it's amazing how many of these killers and shooters actually do make choices based upon some level of rationality.
Yeah, I think the common term for that is a soft target. If you appear to be a soft target, you're more likely to be attacked. And commonly, I think that's, women that are alone or people that aren't paying attention, they're seen as soft targets. Another thing is that we call bad guys for a reason. And really and truly, no matter what kind of legislation or background checks, though they are effective to a sense, we call them bad guys for a reason because if they're intent on destruction, the human heart is evil, found in the Psalms. If they're intent on destruction, they're going to acquire a gun. So again, it kind of comes down to the part where make it easy for people to get a gun, get them trained, make them effective with it. And I think a lot of these shootings, a lot of shooters would think twice before just going in and opening up on a crowd.
And you mentioned something else just in passing, and we'll take a break and we'll take some more phone calls after the top of the hour. And that is, if you're concealed carry, I know a lot of things about you right now, Jonathan. I know that, first of all, you've passed a background check. I know that you probably have not ever been cited for domestic abuse. I know that you probably haven't gone through any kind of mental health evaluation, because there are certain criteria, even in the state of Georgia, that you have to actually qualify for. And so then when I see these individuals saying no handguns allowed in the store, I'm thinking, no, the kind of people you want in the store are the people that have actually shown that they're different than the general population. And so, anyway, it's just something I thought I might mention, that there is always this idea that, well, if you are concealed carry, you're a dangerous person. No, I think I know a whole lot more about you, just the fact that you have a concealed carry license, than I knew if I were just talking to somebody who just happened to call into Point of View. So thank you for taking the time out of your day and giving us a call.
Thank you, Kerby. Appreciate what you guys do.
I appreciate you calling in. Let me just mention that I think we had somebody who was a registered nurse wanted to talk about the mental health field, and I think had to go back to her work. If I can get her on the second hour, I do want to talk about the drug issue and the PTSD issue, and, of course, all sorts of other issues. Of course, we're going to be celebrating veterans on Sunday. That's the 100th anniversary of the Veterans Day, which started out as Armistice Day. So I certainly want to talk about the need we have to reach out to veterans, especially those who have suffered from PTSD. What can we and what should we do to help them as well? That's another part of this conversation. But we do need to take a break. So when we come back, if you'd like to join us, I'll give you first choice because it'll be a few minutes before we're back on the program. But if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some of these other topics right after these important messages.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Next hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Put a couple of issues on the table. First of all, this is a tragic shooting that took place at the Borderline Bar and Grill in Thousand Oaks, California. Ian Long, 28 years of age. It raises questions about PTSD. It raises questions about gun control, questions about what we can do for our veterans, and certainly an important issue. Number two, of course, we've talked about Jeff Sessions leaving as the Attorney General, what that might mean for the Mueller investigation, especially with Matthew Whitaker as the acting Attorney General. And, of course, you have all sorts of possible nominees for the Attorney General's spot, so we'll see where that goes. White House suspending press access for CNN's Jim Acosta. Because the president actually was very upset with the fact that he was done with Jim Acosta, but would not actually turn over the microphone, referred to him as a rude, terrible person. And then, of course, you had Sarah Sanders, who actually said President Trump believes in a free press and expects and welcomes tough questions of him and his administration. We will, however, never tolerate a reporter placing his hands on a young woman just trying to do her job as a White House intern. That second part, of course, has been controversial. We'll get to that a little bit later. But I see that we have some calls left over from the previous hour when we talked about this issue of gun control and PTSD and the veterans. So let's take those phone calls first. And then if you would like to join us on many of these other topics we'll get to this hour, that is certainly what we will try to do. If you don't have a chance to get through, certainly we'll be talking about some of these issues again tomorrow. And, of course, if we don't cover all these issues, we certainly will cover them tomorrow on our Friday weekend edition. Let's go up to first Arkansas, KCMH. Kelly, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for having me, Kerby. How are you today?
I am good, and I appreciate you calling in. I think you want to look at some of the spiritual issues, so go for it.
Yeah, before we took prayer out of school, can you tell me how many school shootings we had? I don't believe there was a single school shooting. I think we have more of a moral problem in this country.
Well, I think we do. And first of all, there were a couple of really horrendous things that happened in the schools, but not many. I got in trouble years ago when I was doing a television show where I said, I don't think it's the guns, guys. I think it's the morals, because I said there was a time when individuals would come to school, they would have the rifle club or things like that, and they would bring their rifles in. Many of those rifles, by the way, were loaded at the time, or certainly could be engaged very quickly, and they'd set them in the back of the room. There are people that have told us stories over the years of even on the subways in New York, individuals would have a rifle or a gun with them because they were part of the shooting club or something like that. You can't even imagine that now. Now, of course, the pushback was, well, yeah, now they're walking in with 357 Magnums, or in this case, a 45 caliber Glock. Well, maybe, but we have been in situations, and I've been in situations where lots of people have guns. If you've ever been to a National Rifle Association meeting, if you've ever been to a gun store, been to a shooting range, it's not necessarily the guns. I mean, I've been in situations where lots of people have guns and nobody's been shot. And I've been in other situations where it's been grateful that people without any kind of morals, or in this case, PTSD, people with some real difficult problems they're dealing with, I've been grateful they haven't had guns because I'm afraid what they might actually do. So it's a really sad commentary on where we find ourselves in, but taking prayer out of the schools and no longer talking about morality and right and wrong, I just do believe that that's at least part of the issue as to why we've had some of these school shootings. So, Kelly, I appreciate you bringing that up today.
And I don't believe that, the value of human life is taught enough. That should be taught more in school, that we don't have the right to take another life unless our own life or someone we love is in danger. We don't have that right.
Well, and the other part of that is that life gets cheapened when you watch a lot of television where you see people getting killed, or where you play video games where people are getting killed, or you're even doing a point and shoot kind of thing. So and again, I'm not placing the blame on any one individual. We have individuals watch violent video games and play violent video games and never shot anybody. We have people that have watched lots of violent movies that have never shot anybody. So I'm not saying that any one factor is the silver bullet, bad illustration, but the one-size-fits-all answer, because I think you really are dealing with different reasons for why that's taking place. But I think those are at least possible explanations to pay attention to. So, Kelly, I appreciate your phone call today.
Yeah, and the bottom line is evil people are going to do evil things. And what I hate is they're going to politicize this and try to take away people's rights. And I've read the Constitution through 3 times, and they don't really even have the rights to put the limits that they put on or to do some of the things they're doing. If they want to control who does get a firearm or not, what they should do is focus on the people selling them. I know I purchased firearms, and I pray I never use one on another human being. I hope I'm never put in that situation, but I have that ability if my life is in danger, and that shouldn't be stripped from me because of what some madman bent on hurting someone does. But the people selling the firearms, I mean, they probably feel bad if someone did something bad with a firearm bought from them, or at least if I sold the firearm, I would feel bad if someone went and committed something. So if they did a more thorough background themselves, and if, the people that have PTSD, if when they do a background check, they see that, they can just deny the sale. They can say, well, no, sir, I choose not to sell you this firearm.
Yeah, this one legally was purchased. So, again, in a state that is considered number one in terms of all sorts of gun control regulations. I mean, it's, again, you can look at the website, maybe we'll post it later, and it's number one. I mean, it's actually has more regulations than Connecticut and Massachusetts and New Jersey, places like that, New York. And still, it happened in California. So let's take some more phone calls. Matter of fact, let's go out to California. John, thank you for joining us today. What's your point of view?
Hi, my name is John. People aren't thinking about the situation here where you have somebody with a gun on their hip and they're inside of a situation where somebody comes in shooting. First of all, veterans don't walk around saying they have PTSD, that they're ill. They don't do that, okay? They have too much pride. And that's how they get the gun.
And that's part of the problem. I've talked about that there's kind of a macho image. I'm not going to admit that I have any needs. So good point. Go ahead.
Well, secondly, law enforcement doesn't need to walk into an active shooter situation and try and figure out who's the bad guy. Who's the guy with the gun that's a good guy that's just in there with he's just buying a soda and he happens to be in the store. My uncle was a sheriff for 35 years. We lost a sheriff today of 29 years. He was a year away from retiring. I lost a dear friend's son today. It's just not the way to do this. We can't run around with guns on our hips. Everybody's going to be shooting everybody and say, oh, it's my Second Amendment right. No, it's not.
Good point. We need to take a break, and when we come back, what about that? Because that's another issue. And again, if you find yourself in a situation with an active shooter and you pull out your weapon, how in the world does somebody in law enforcement or a SWAT team know that you aren't the perpetrator? So it's a very important question about that. So John brought that up, and I put that on the table as well. We've got some more phone calls. I think some of you want to talk about issues of medication and PTSD, so we'll get to those calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Congress has lots of unfinished business. One important item is prison and sentencing reform. The House of Representatives has already passed the First Step Act. It is time for the Senate to do the same. Recently, I had Rebecca Hagelin on Point of View Radio Talk Show to talk about her commentary on our failing prisons and faulty war on drugs. A few months ago, I had Star Parker on to talk about the same legislation. These women will admit that they have been known as being tough on crime, but both of them also realize locking up parents of kids for years for nonviolent drug offenses is doing more damage to society than good. Our current federal laws require mandatory sentences for nonviolent drug offenses. Often the people we throw into prison for 2 decades are low-level dealers, not drug kingpins, who we really need to get off the streets. Sadly, they receive little or no vocational training and little in the way of drug rehabilitation. No wonder the recidivism rate in America is so high. President Trump has made this issue one of his most important issues. Jared Kushner has been given the responsibility to push the legislation forward. It passed the House of Representatives back in May with overwhelming bipartisan support, and when it reached the Senate Judiciary Committee, senators added some modest common-sense sentencing reform initiatives. To those who say that this is merely an attempt to be weak on crime, Rebecca Hagelin has a response. A very small percentage of arrests for drug distribution involve major drug traffickers. Most of the arrests are for small-time, nonviolent offenders. Many of them are addicts who turn to selling drugs to support their habit. Warehousing them in prison for years at taxpayer expense makes little sense. That's why it's time for the Senate to vote on this sensible piece of legislation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Now playing. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we've talked a little bit about, of course, the shooting taking place in California, Jeff Sessions being forced out as Attorney General, and just a few minutes ago I mentioned about the White House suspending the press credentials for Jim Acosta for CNN. I mentioned in passing, but let me just put this on the table, too, as another conversation point, which we can get into, and then I'll take some of those phone calls, and that is that we've had the Fox News host Tucker Carlson's home was targeted. There are individuals that rang the doorbell chanting, "Racist scumbag, leave town." Now, it turns out that at the time, his wife was there with their children, and he was not there because he was at the Fox News studios in Washington preparing for a show. Makes sense, but nevertheless, they even broke his oak door. He says that he caught on security video somebody mentioning a pipe bomb, and this has gotten very scary as well. If for no other reason than if you watch the various Twitter posts, a number of people say, well, he just deserves it. Oh, goodness, please. Does not deserve that. As a matter of fact, he said that really he can't even go out to restaurants anymore because he is routinely heckled at a restaurant. He has found one where he's protected enough where he can do that. But he said having somebody scream and then obscenity, I won't get into the word, at a restaurant kind of wrecks your meal. And he's been targeted that he can't even go out to restaurants anymore. And as I always like to say, turn this around and think of somebody else that is a talk show host that is maybe on the other side of the spectrum. Think about what we have seen happening to one senator, Ted Cruz, and see if that happens the other direction. And you can, I think, see that Wait a minute. We need to just calm this down. And I'm looking for some leaders on both sides of the aisle to begin to condemn some of this action, because it's almost impossible now, if you have any kind of viewpoints, to go out in public and not face some of the kind of persecution, some of the kind of assaults that are taking place. And some of them are, quite frankly, pretty dangerous, because Tucker Carlson's not even at home, so his wife has to go in a back bedroom with the kids because they're hitting the door and fearing that they might actually come in the door, and who knows what happens there. So if nothing else, these are a couple of other issues I want to put on the table today, and these are actually in addition to the ones I thought we'd be talking about today on a Thursday program. Let's go back to the phones, though, and give some of you a chance to join our conversation today. We'll go to North Carolina. Jessica, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
I would just like to talk about the shooter situation and kind of it's gun violence in general being a symptom of a much bigger problem in America. Because, there are hundreds of thousands of families with guns in their homes. And, as you talked about, they don't just go around shooting people for no reason. And I know that there is a large group of adolescents and young adults that are definitely depressed and on these medications. And these medications, I don't think we're studying the side effects of these medications. They're mind-altering medications. And these adolescents are allowed access to guns, and then these things happen.
Well, again, I am well aware of that. It's interesting that we had, of course, Kevin Leman on earlier, and one of the additions to his book had to do with, OxyContin and things like that. Now, he was just looking at the behavioral issues, wasn't, of course, thinking about guns or anything like that, but we are dealing with some things with the opioid addictions and opioid epidemic, with various other kinds of mind-altering drugs and marijuana and things of that nature, not to mention the psychotropic drugs that are sometimes being used to treat individuals. So we're in a little bit of unfamiliar territory, but then adding to that a violent culture where you see lots of violent images on television or on video games. And then you add to that, I think, something else you want to talk about, the breakdown of the family.
Yes,
that is
absolutely.
a really dangerous mixture. So go ahead, because I know you wanted to address that issue too.
Yes, there was a time where even if it didn't matter what religion or if you went to church, it didn't matter. There was a time where we did things as a family on the weekends. There was a lot of let's go to the baseball game, let's do things together, and there was more of a sense of community, a family unit. And now we have both parents working more than ever. Now we have, these teenagers, they're being left to the internet to be babysat. They're being left kind of on their own in a sense. They're in the daycare all day. They grow up in daycare, and then their parents are working all the time. And I feel like gun violence is just this bigger symptom of the deterioration of someone being home, someone being there to correct these behaviors or say, hey, no, you've had enough of that video game, or hey, you've had enough of going to Johnny's house on the weekends. And I think that there is just been this breakdown, and now we have medication added to that for the depression. And we're seeing kind of things unravel. And at what point as a parent, I can't send my daughter to school. I can't send her to a concert, can't send her out to a college night. And at what point do we look at that and say, okay, well, where's the system of, well, this person kind of has a history. Should we let them have an access to gun? There's just such a fine line.
I know it is.
We're
again,
into.
I'm opening to our individuals to say, okay, what can we do? Because the argument has always been we need more common sense gun control legislation. Okay, I'm all ears. What are those? Given the fact that in California we have the most stringent regulations of any of the 50 states. Okay, and, what else can we add to that you haven't done in California? Given the fact that you do have additional regulations that have passed through the legislature in Sacramento and signed by a relatively liberal progressive governor. So tell me what else we could do.
I mean,
okay, go ahead.
As a citizen who has a gun, as a citizen who took that responsibility, but also, I appreciate the Second Amendment. I'm glad that we have the Second Amendment. But, it's getting to the point to me where can we, I don't want to say that it's wrong to put everybody in the database, but is there a way that we can annually check, or is there a screening system that we can say, hey, this might not be a good idea? I mean, everybody deserves their constitutional rights, but at the same time, doesn't everybody deserve the right to life? We're just treading this fine line, and I don't think anybody really has the right answer, because guns aren't going away. We're going to have to find a way to be mature, I think, across the aisle, and kind of find a way, a family unit. America is missing their family unit right now.
Well, again, I get in trouble when I bring up the fact that I think it's more a family issue and a moral issue and maybe even a drugs issue than it is a gun issue. But, at least here, I think most of you agree with me on that. So that's nice to have a nice platform where we can say that I think we are talking, as you said, about symptoms. And these are symptoms of deeper problems that have nothing to do with guns and everything to do with the fact that these are difficult circumstances that have been created by a very toxic mixture of breakdown of the family, of PTSD, of violent images, and all of the rest. And so even if the guns did not exist, if you could somehow wave a wand and there were no guns at all except in the hands of law enforcement, first of all, there'd be a lot of people still get access to them, and they just find other ways to kill people.
And I agree. As a person who, I say I'm independent. I don't really lean one way towards the other. I lean towards common sense in a lot of ways when it comes to politics. But to me, there's got to be some kind of line to where we can say, I know that it's nobody's fault. This particular instance, like a good guy with a gun isn't going to stop necessarily a bad guy with a gun. We saw this with this latest incident where he went in, and the first person he went for was the security guard.
Yep.
I just want to, I don't really have an answer, but I would like to get to a place where we could say, hey, maybe it's not a good idea if, every single person had access. But then again, I don't want to tread on anyone's constitutional rights either.
Well, again, we've talked about some of the things that David French has talked about. Again, my little booklet on Second Amendment talks about some ideas that people have come up with, because when you hand this case, have an individual that the mental health specialist at least acknowledged that maybe they could not commit him involuntarily. They could have flagged him. I don't know when the gun was purchased, but I don't know. I want to have a real balance between constitutional rights and right to life. And I think you and I both agree that both of those are equally valid. And how do you balance those? In a culture where a lot of people just want to point fingers and interview some of the individuals from Parkland and some of the gun control advocates who are just going to be shouting at the top of their lungs that the guns are the problem. And we know that this is an individual that was troubled and probably shouldn't have had access to it in the first place. But
I will say that with my own mother, she has had some issues with the opioids and things that we've been discussing on today's show. And when she kind of told everyone in our family she was getting a gun, we all collectively did not allow her to do that.
Good point.
We kind of...
Yeah, I'm unfortunately got a break, and when we come back, we'll take some more phone calls. Got a full bank of calls. We'll take those right after this.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, you'll have to wait because all the lines are full, and we'll do our best to try to get to those. And if we don't cover all of that today, we will certainly cover it tomorrow in our Friday weekend edition. Let me just mention that we've gone through a number of articles that are on the website you might want to read. And one of those by David French, I think I'll postpone till tomorrow, because it turns out that this particular comment that he makes relates to my commentary tomorrow. You've had some individuals who are liberals saying, it's not fair the way we have the Senate constructed, because we have a situation in which 70% of Americans by 2040 will live in just 15 largest states. So that means that 30 senators will represent 70% of America, whereas then the other 30% of America will be represented by 70 senators. And first of all, I take that question on tomorrow in my commentary that I've already recorded, because that came up when there was the whole question about Brett Kavanaugh. Why are we allowing people from small states to have an equal vote from people with large states? And I take that on because obviously 2 senators in California represent 2 votes, just like 2 senators from Wyoming, yet the difference in population is striking, between about 40 million and a half a million. But that's what the founders intended. But it also illustrates, again, how in some respects the Senate has been helpful to those who are rural, those who come from less populous states, and that's exactly what was intended by the framers, and actually I think is a good idea. But we'll get into that tomorrow, but the article's on the website. And one we won't get to today, maybe we'll get to later. Of course, this film, Boy Erased, has come out, and it's based on the memoir by Gerald Conley. And, of course, we have this piece that is written by Joe Dallas, who has worked with the conversion therapies. This is all about, it's just really a troubling particular movie, because Nicole Kidman and Russell Crowe play these sort of fundamentalist parents. And this boy, Lucas Hedges, actually is coming out as a homosexual, so they put him through some therapy. Now, if you read the book, and I'm only reading about the book, it is already a little bit questionable in terms of the kind of so-called treatment he receives. The movie just goes overboard by having them dress, sit, walk, carry themselves in certain ways, dunking a person underwater, all sorts of stuff, none of which the various ministries over the years that have used to begin to at least provide an opportunity for individuals, if they wanted to change some of their sexual preference or their sexual temptations, could do. So anyway, wanted you to read this piece by Joe Dallas. Very well done. An individual that was the founder of Exodus International, at least one of the presidents. I don't know if he was actually the founder. And just gives you a little balanced perspective to a very unbalanced movie that is going to get a lot of press. So I just wanted you to know those articles are there. But most of you want to talk about PTSD. Many of you want to talk about gun control. Some of you want to talk about what has happened in this country. So we're going to give you a chance to address as many of those topics as possible. So let's first head to Corpus Christi, Texas. Carl, you have the floor.
Yes, sir. Blessings to you, Mr. Kerby. The issue on medication, I honestly studied a lot of medication and versus plants as medication, and a lot of the medications that people are given are mixed with man-made chemicals, which cause a lot of these negative side effects mentally, physically. And I believe that the country, it's not surprising, because God said a lot of these things were going to happen. People would become ungodly due to sin being on the increase, and it's the culture. The culture has somewhat become sick and addicted to things that are, like, you could say, vulgar. The society has become very vulgar and
depraved.
Yeah, depraved. And
in Romans 1, professing to be wise, they became fools, and they worship the creation rather than the creator, those kinds of things. I mean, I think you see what the Apostle Paul was talking about when he was writing the book of Romans.
Yes. It was a very good movie. If you didn't see the Apostle Paul movie, it was very good, by the way. Inspiring. And then I was reading on my Bible app how Paul, even from prison, being persecuted, was cheerfully and happily spreading the gospel still. And at the end of the quote on the Bible app, it said, "What more can we do as believers who are not confined in a jail cell?" I think it's up to us as believers to really stand firm for family right now, because Satan, Hasatan, which is the enemy in Hebrew, because I speak a little bit of Latin and Hebrew, I think it's important for people to learn the languages of the Bible. But just, I say, keep the nations in prayer, all the nations, because the world itself is an attack right now. And I just love what y'all are doing there. It's very good for families to listen to. I used to listen to it with my wife and kids, but we're currently separated at the moment due to what I was just speaking about. So I would like to ask for y'all to keep me in your prayers.
Yeah, everybody, please pray for Carl.
blessings.
And I appreciate you calling in and appreciate your study of God's Word. And certainly that is the case. And again, we can curse the darkness or we can light some lamps. And it seems to me that maybe it's time to see what we can to make a difference and be a difference in our communities. Let's go to California, KYCC. And Jim, you have the opportunity now to share with our nation. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, Kerby, listening to all of what we've been talking about years ago, calling in and going over the same thing, is the depravity that we have now since we removed Jesus Christ from our schools. Our values have changed. We've become the cesspool that you brought up before. You know, the other point is with this drug thing is you go back to the 70s when they were using 70s and 80s when they were using Ritalin in all the children. And, you know, the excuse that an inanimate object can kill somebody is such a fallacy that's being taught and pushed now to create more fear and scare people so they can be easily controlled. And I see this that, you know, I'm out right now picking up campaign signs because I've been involved politically for 40 years.
Well, thank you for doing that.
And all I see is some of the people we even get elected to be good representatives cave in to this temptation of simplicity and easiness and want to be liked. And they don't understand our God-given rights and the values that our founders put into that Constitution to know that, you know what, it's an individual that glorifies God, not the country, but the individual. So the individuals that make up the country can glorify God. And, you know, listening to some of the callers that have called in that are confused and kind of unsure of because of the gun situation should realize that the wisdom that our founders had was so, I mean, we don't have that anymore because we've dumbed our society down so much. So I just putting that out and knowing from California, knowing that, you know, just going out to buy a gun right now in this state, if you don't have the right driver's license, you can't even get a gun, you know. And I was with a gentleman who's an attorney in the state of California for over 25 years, and we were just looking at each other going, we've been involved in this fight for years, and look at the challenges that law-abiding citizens have just to protect themselves. That years ago, we used to carry guns openly in our trucks, in our cars. We took them to school. We had shooting ranges at school. So what changed? We removed God. And that's what we got to get back to.
Good points. Appreciate you sharing that with us today. Let's, if we can, take another phone call. We'll go to North Carolina on the Good News Network. Andrea, thank you for calling today.
Well, Kerby, I just want to ask, it's important for me to know, how old did you say this shooter in California at Thousand Oaks was? How old is he?
28.
He killed himself. How old?
28.
Yes, so he was an ex-Marine, but he was a young ex-Marine, right?
Very young. Yeah, some had said 29, but I think that now we've concluded he's actually 28. Ian Long, 28 years of age.
I want to connect with, I guess it sounds stupid, but I want to connect with James Holmes with that movie, Dark Knight Rising, which was just a Batman movie, but that was in 2008, and that movie came out in the theaters, right? And he went into that theater and he killed 12,
Shot
I believe
people.
I remember right. And
Aurora, Colorado.
And he wounded like 70-some, and he was a PhD neuroscience person getting ready to graduate, and nobody's talked about it. But somehow it all, I mean, that's, my goodness, that's 10 years ago, and I'd like for you to comment on the connection over 10 years of all the stuff that's happened with all these shootings.
I certainly will do that. I need to go to a break, but I'll come back. And John Lott has done some very significant research of that individual that was shooting there in Aurora. And one of the things he points out is even people that we see as irrational, they still make rational decisions. He drove past a number of movie theaters which allowed concealed carry to go to a movie theater which was tied to a particular mall which would not allow concealed carry. So even irrational people sometimes make what seem to be rational decisions and look for soft targets. We'll come back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Liberty Christian Center in Watertown, New York, asked for permission to use the Watertown High School cafeteria for its religious services. As their application stated, the worship services to be conducted in the public school cafeteria would include activities of music, religious instruction, and Christian testimony. But the local school board denied the application, stating that since New York law did not specifically authorize religious organizations to utilize public school buildings, the application had to be denied. The court reviewed previous uses of the public school cafeteria. It found that among other uses, the school had been used to host a local talent night, which featured religious music, religious instruction, and even Christian testimony. Since both the worship service and the local talent show shared a religious purpose and context, it was unlawful for the school to permit the talent show but deny the use of the facility for a worship service. Some decry the use of a public school by a religious organization as a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. That is simply not true. The First Amendment demands that the school board be neutral toward religion. Letting a secular organization use school property but denying a religious organization the same use is not neutrality, it's hostility. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, one of the questions Andrea is saying is, what about the similarities? And there are some striking similarities. First of all, this particular shooting we were talking about there in Aurora, Colorado, took place July of 2012. So, again, it was just a few years ago. It seems like it was further back than that, where he entered into a Century 16 movie theater there in Aurora. And the similarities are that he also used, like we have this individual that was shooting those people at the Borderline Bar and Grill, smoke bombs to confuse people. Now, this individual in Aurora, Colorado, was loaded and armed to the teeth in that he used a tactical shotgun. He also used a particular semi-automatic rifle. He also had a Glock 22, which is a 40 caliber handgun, very similar to what most police use. He also, interestingly enough, had a ballistic helmet, bullet-resistant leggings, and a number of other things, and protectors and tactical gloves. So this is one where even if you had possibly concealed carry, you'd have to actually hit him in the right spot, because otherwise he would probably have been protected by some of the gear that he was wearing. So just a tragic situation. He actually is alive, so of course we have a chance to learn more about some of the actions and reasons. I don't really care what the reasons are for these individuals when they do evil things, but nevertheless, that's just a brief summary of something that happened a couple of years ago, which, by the way, was the worst shooting in Colorado since the Columbine shooting, and was the worst one ever until we had the Orlando shooting, and then, of course, more recently, the Las Vegas shooting. The body counts have gone up, in part because these individuals actually want that to happen. They want to get some notoriety, which is bizarre alone, for actually killing more people. But nevertheless, that's something we've talked about before with John Lott, probably getting back on again sometime in the future. But let's take a few more phone calls, because I do want to give as many of you that have been waiting a long time a chance to express your opinion on a national radio program. So we'll go to South Carolina on the Good News Network and talk to Clint. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call, Kerby. It just amazes me how every time we have one of these shootings, and they are terrible, but the thing is, it always goes to the gun. We have got in our nation where now no one has to be responsible, no one has to be accountable. It's always something else that caused it. There are just mean people in the world. There are people who choose to do bad.
This man was actually referred to when he was his college roommate said he was mean. He was a loner.
Mean.
Yeah. So he was a mean person. Now, did PTSD lower inhibitions? Maybe it did, but he's still accountable for what he did. Whether he's got mental problems or not, he's still accountable. We hold the shooter accountable. And you're right. We tend to look for inanimate objects like guns, saying, gosh, if we could just get rid of the 330 million guns in this country, then there would be no more violence in America. Wrong.
Wrong. I mean, all over the world, we have countries that don't have it. And look at Europe and all these other places where gun laws are so strict, at how much goes on because of people who just want to be against God. That's the whole problem. As one of your callers said, we took God out of our schools. We're trying to kick him out of our country, it seems like. And I mean, he prophesies that. He said that there'll come a time when men won't have to take responsibility for anything they do. It'll be excused. And it's approaching us faster and faster and faster. And the sad thing is it's because people don't know the Bible. They don't read it. They don't understand that these things are going to happen, and that the only way we can stop them is turn to God.
Well, again, that's what we try to encourage people to do, listening to Point of View. And Clint, I appreciate your wise counsel and your perspective. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for talking to me.
Let's, if we can, probably be the last call of the day. So let's go to Bob, who is listening on WPEO in Illinois. Bob, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. When I hear about the gun control and that we need reasonable gun control laws, my first question is, well, what do you mean by reasonable gun control laws?
Yeah, I mean, it's a focus group word. It says we want common sense gun control regulations. And I'm going, okay, help me out here. California has the most restrictive gun control laws in the nation. That's not my opinion. This comes from a group that has evaluated every one of the laws and says that California is more restrictive. It has more, quote, common sense gun control laws than any other state in the country. And this happened there. So what else are you proposing, since you won't tell us? and you just have this sort of focus-driven idea of common sense gun control laws. What do you really mean? I think that's a question we should be asking, don't you think?
Absolutely. But I always say, well, what's below the line? I'm a pastor, and to me, common sense gun laws would be, as a former president said, maybe we should be looking at Australia and their gun confiscation. So to me,
there you go.
Common sense is just confiscation. One of the things I did this past Sunday, I addressed the tree of life because I am a pastor.
Yes.
And
Thank you for doing that.
I brought up 3 scenarios about the tree of life. A firearm was used. Also, the 3 Girl Scouts and the adult that was killed by, I believe it was a truck in Wisconsin. And then here in central Illinois, we had a person was killed with a knife. I said, well, what caused all of that? And I went back to the book of Genesis, and when I talked about the evil that comes out of man's heart, that seems to be the common denominator. And so that's the avenue that I took. And listening to all your other callers, taking God out, that's all a part of it.
Well, again, next Tuesday, my commentary is on anti-Semitism, so we get into that whole question as well as what happened there in the synagogue. So as a pastor, first of all, I think your congregation is really blessed to have somebody of your caliber preaching God's word to them. And I really appreciate you taking some time out of, I'm sure, a busy schedule for ministry to call us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you. I'm sitting in front of a nursing home. I'm going to visit a Vietnam veteran who does suffer from PTSD. He has multiple health issues. He was a tunnel rat, and I'm just going to bring some hope to him and God's word too.
Well, again, I would encourage you to pray for Bob right now. Pray for Carl. We talked about that earlier, and some of the others that would appreciate your prayer. And so, Bob, thank you for being willing to give us a call. I do make it to Peoria every once in a while. Look forward to the next opportunity. Maybe I can shake your hand.
Yes, blessings to you, Kerby. Thank you, and keep up the good work.
Let's take a break. We are simply out of time today, and I guess we went through most of the calls, so if you didn't get a chance to express your opinion, I know a couple of times you probably were calling, and all the lines were busy, and so that's always frustrating, so we'll try tomorrow, but we'll have Debbie Georgiadis will be with us, and Lathan Watts, and Penny Dexter and Kelly Shackelford are out, and I thought it'd be good to get some other voices anyway. It'll be our weekend edition, and that's an opportunity to look at a number of things that have taken place. Both of them have been involved in political campaigns, so maybe they can give us some perspective on what happened in the House and the Senate, and we'll also, of course, be looking at many of the other issues we talked about here today, because there were certainly many that we didn't have a chance to get to. So I hope you appreciated the conversation we had here on Point of View. If you find yourself saying, I would like to read a little bit more on some of these issues, go to the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew for his help behind the scenes. Elisa has been with us today, taking the phone calls, and we will be back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.